everybody, welcome back. This is Carol. Some of you refer to me as Professor Redden. I wanted to talk to you guys today about resume content. If you watched the last couple of videos, you know we talked about resume formatting, which is equally important as the content. But most of you, I think, want to see examples of how you could put content into your resume to make it really great. For those who are new to the channel or haven't met me, my experience is mostly in the academic world and higher education. I've worked a lot with recruiters, employers, and HR managers to learn about what makes a resume great and how it should look and what should be in it. And then I also do training and development consulting work, and this kind of content comes up a lot in that work as well. My goal with this channel is just to help give you guys the tools and skills you need to either get into a career or thrive in a career in a way that you don't have to pay somebody a lot of money to be able to do that. So let's start with, I'm going to walk you guys through just kind of the top, middle, and then the bottom of a resume. Please keep in mind that you can change these sections as you need to, depending on your experience and what it is that you want to showcase. At the very top, you'll see that I've got a spot there for your name. Again, in the formatting video, I talk about why it's a little bit larger than the other content. But what I want to draw your attention to in this section is that, well, I have a space for your name and I have a space for your email and a phone number. You'll notice I do not have a space. Oh, sorry, I have maybe a cat hair on my nose. I do not have a space here for a physical address, and that's on purpose. Partly because some employers will screen you out if they think that you live too far away from the opportunity. And then also partly I recommend not including your address because it can be creepy for too many people to know where you live, right? So in general, unless you live very near the place that you're going to apply for, I recommend leaving your physical address off the resume entirely. As far as the email address here, I recommend setting up an account if you don't have one that looks like your first name and your last name, some sort of version of that. There are a lot of examples of things that are inappropriate, and some just kind of take the employers away from what it is you want to tell them. For example, something like Jacob's mom, 72, is not inappropriate. Number one, it tells them, though, that you probably have a child named Jacob, and they're not legally allowed to ask if you have children, so I don't recommend offering that. But number two, it's a missed opportunity to get the employers thinking of you as a brand, right? We want them in every opportunity that they see your resume to be thinking about, oh, I like this person named Carol, and her email address, just it's easy to remember. It's carol_redden@gmail.com. That's not actually my email address, but something like that. For those of you, if you go to set up a new account, just for resume submissions or career searching, and they ask you to include a number, I recommend not including your 4-digit birth year for that exact reason. Employers are not allowed to ask how old you are, and so I just think it's not necessary to offer that information. Okay, so that's the header section. And if you remember in the other video, we talked about putting this information in the header section so that the top of every page looks exactly the same. And just as a quick note, you don't have to try to fit all your information on one page. I don't think that that's a rule that most employers will follow these days. It has been the rule for a lot of years, and I certainly would say everything you put on your resume should be purposeful, should be some intent behind it, meaning it adds value. And so if you go to a second page, but everything has been formatted really well, you don't have a lot of white space, and the content adds value, then go to a second page. But you don't want to go to a second or even third page if you haven't managed your formatting or you're putting in a lot of what we would call fluff, okay? So that's just kind of a side note in terms of the length of your resume. You notice that the next section I have here is objective. Objectives used to be something that you had to have on any resume, anytime. I still would say that they are great to have. Ideally, you would have some kind of objective that says, hey, employer, this is what skill set or experience I have to offer you specifically for this position. It just takes away any guessing from the employer's perspective of what it is you want, right? And so if you look here, I say obtain XYZ position, meaning you're going to be specific, that will utilize a number of years of some kind of experience, and then whatever else you want to offer to the employer. But I recommend, again, being specific and tailoring this to an employer for a specific job. If you think to yourself, man, I really am not sure how I can quantify my skills or be specific about, the things that I want to offer, then maybe just don't have an objective until you can. As another side note, one thing you want to do, is tailor your resume to each and every employer. You will get better results if you do so, rather than just saying, well, I'm just going to have this one resume. I'm going to send it out to all different types of employers and see what I get. You will probably not get very much from that. Okay, so I do recommend tailoring your content to every employer. We talked about why you might have the education section at the top. And again, if you are in college or a recent graduate and or if education is required for the job you want, then your education section should be at the top. Always, you want to list items in the order of most recent at the top, right? So when we start a new section, whatever's our most recent education goes right there. How much you decide to put in the education section will depend on all of the rest of the content in your resume and what other sections you have. But I've given you an example here of what I share with the college students that I work with. They have the name of the college there. They have the name of the degree that they're working on. Notice that this person, this sample, we included a GPA. The reason we included the grade point average is because it's high and it's competitive. If you were somebody who says, hey, I worked very hard in college and I managed a lot of other things and I got a 3.2, I'm very proud of that, then that's awesome. The question is whether seeing a 3.2 on a resume without knowing the other backstory is going to be of value to an employer. If you're in a very competitive field, then 3.25 or 3.2 is not maybe competitive. You want to only list your grade point average if it's a 3.5 or higher. That being said, right now, at the time I'm making this video, job seekers have quite a bit of opportunity to find jobs. There are a lot of jobs out there. So even if your grade point average is like a 3.0, 2.8 even, you could list it. I would just, again, be very purposeful about every word you put on this page. Make sure it adds value to the employer, okay? Here in italics, I have the name of a certificate that I'm offering for my students and also the community. It's called Emerging Professional Seminar Series, and they will get a certificate of participation when they complete this. And that's something that I'm hoping employers will take a look at and want to know more about. So we've listed that in the education section. In many cases, when students are in a specialized field, even if it's business or accounting, or in this case, hospitality, many times students will have work that's related to their field, like you'll see in this case, but sometimes they don't have work. Let's say they're in the criminal justice field and they think, I've obviously never, been to a crime scene or never, been in the police academy or know all the procedures yet. So in those cases, what most closely ties the students to the field is their education, the fact that they're learning these things in the classroom. And so that's why you see this section here that says related coursework, because it's meant to just provide the opportunity toward the top of the resume in the education section to say, hey, here are all the specific concepts I've been learning. And so even if I don't have job experience, I'm still aware of the content or the concepts that I need for this field. We talked a little bit about in the formatting side of things in a different video. If you're going to list bold and italics and that kind of thing. So just choose wisely. Whatever information you think is going to add the most value, whether it's the name of the place, meaning employer or school, or it's your job title, or in this case, degree, bold whatever you think is going to be most purposeful. Off to the side, you'll notice I have the city and state, date of when things are happening. Notice that I don't have months here and I don't have months anywhere on the resume. That's something that changed, I think more so in like 2010, 11, and 12, when it was very hard for people to keep jobs, especially and including people with master's degrees. The economy was just not great. Employers were not able to keep people for a long period of time. So the months just kind of fell off the resume. Keep in mind, you still have to list the months on an application. And certainly if you ever apply for a government entity and they ask for the months on your resume, then you should include them. Otherwise, it's kind of nice to not have to list the months. Okay, so I don't recommend it unless it's asked for. As we scroll down, you'll see the next section that I've made space for is called professional experience. And I've called it that instead of work history, just because it sounds so much better. Also, it's an opportunity to get the employer thinking of you as a professional rather than just, hey, somebody who had a job doing some things for some period of time. In this case, we know that the student is working toward hospitality management or hotel management, degree path. And so we're listing experience that's related toward the top of the resume. If this were, let's say you're a student and you're in the nursing program and you, obviously it's one of those professions, you couldn't have worked as a nurse until after you are a graduate and certified. What you could do instead of a professional experience section is call this clinical experience, and then list your clinicals or any practicums that you might have had. And then underneath it, you could call it a section related experience, or then it could be professional experience. But for most people, they're just going to have this professional experience section. And again, I've chosen to bold the title of either my job duty or my degree instead of the place. So I'm going to keep that consistent formatting throughout. And I decided that, showcasing that I was already a manager somewhere would add value. And so that's why I bolded it. The next bit of information is usually the hardest part for people to think of what to put in their resume. I'd like you to make a note that I've used bullets here. I've not used full sentences. And that's because a lot of employers are not going to read full sentences or paragraphs. In fact, the average employer is probably going to only spend about 8 seconds looking at the entire resume. And so what you want to do, just by having bullets, you've said, look, you can get in and out of this content pretty easily. I'm not going to expect you to read a whole paragraph. Sorry, I think I have another cat hair floating around. What you will want to do in addition to using bullets is try to start each bulleted item with a strong action verb or adverb. And that just helps to give them a clear picture of what you've done. So I'm saying things like manage and handle and supervise. I'm not saying things like responsible for, or let me think of another one, familiar with, pricing policy, right? I'm trying to get them visualizing me in that role. And by using verbs, that helps to do so. You'll notice that I'm using present tense verbs, meaning it sounds like I'm doing it right now because I am currently at this job. I've said I'm there right now. So my verbs should be present tense. For any jobs that I'm not at anymore, my verbs should be past tense, right? Because they were things I did in the past. For those of you who aren't sure how to list what you did at your past jobs, you can do a couple of things. One, I recommend starting now, start keeping track of the things you're doing, right? Making a list. Also, as you apply for jobs, keep copies of those job descriptions because they will tell you the job duties in the job description. But if you didn't do either of those things and you're sitting here now thinking, how do I list what I did? Maybe the job was 4 or 5 years ago. You can do a search. I use Indeed.com as a website. Go in and look for a similar job. I can just put front desk manager. It doesn't even matter if I find a job that's in Arizona, right? Because the job itself doesn't change that much. Find a similar job, pull all of the items that, their job duties, copy them and pop them or paste them into your resume, and then change them accordingly. Take out things that didn't apply to you, change the verbs if you need to. But that's a good way to kind of fill in your resume if you can't remember what you did or even how to say it. Again, we're keeping the most recent at the top. And when the job is of high level of relevance or importance to the employer, then go ahead and list 5, 6, 7, 8 bullets if you want, right? Anything that's adding value. If I was a front desk manager and one of the things I actually did was I was responsible for keeping the floors clean, let's say, that's maybe important, but is it the most important thing? Probably not. There are other things that I can be listing here, and maybe some other things that are a little more important that I want to use my space for. Okay, for those related jobs, put in the content that whatever adds the most value. And notice that here I have an acronym. That acronym is a term that would be used in the industry that my counterparts in other hotels would understand. And by using it, I tell them that I understand the industry as well. So anytime you can use verbiage or wording from the industry, be sure to do so. Just make sure you're using it correctly. I also, when I was adding another job in here, I was trying to quantify or put a number to how often I did something or be specific about something. Again, if I can name software, or if I can say how many times I did things or what percentage I increased in sales or productivity, I want to try to do that throughout, because this content is what the employer is looking for. It's what you bring to the table. There will be some of you, who have jobs, and I don't know why I picked Arby's. There's nothing wrong with Arby's. It could be Wendy's, it could be Subway, it could be a tire company, it could be anything. But for this particular person, this is just a sample again. If the person had a job that doesn't seem to be directly related to, let's say, hotel management, we still want to list it because it accounts for a period of time when this person was somewhere doing something. Okay, so we still want to list it, but you don't have to list 5, 6, 7 things. Maybe just list 2 and pick 2 things that the new employer would care about. So here we're talking about high level of customer service. Well, in the hospitality world, that's what it's all about, right? So we're saying, even though I was at a company that may not be recognized or branded as high customer service, I was doing that there, or it was important to the company. Also, the number one attribute an employer, most employers want in an employee, is attendance. Great attendance and certainly punctuality. So if you can say this to be true, you can always add this kind of bulleted item, which just says, hey, I was recognized for perfect attendance. Also, I showed initiative, solved problems, and I acted as a leader in a fast-paced environment. Okay, so those would be things, so long as they're true, that you could list even in an unrelated employer. The next section that I have here that I talked about in the last video is civic engagement. We call it that. Just it's similar to volunteering, but it's just more of a buzzword. And so I recommend having this section, even if you did one thing on one day. For example, I've listed here the Susan G. Komen race. Maybe you just did that in 2016 one time because it was a race day, but then you did it in 17 and 18, 2019, and again in 2020. Even though it was a one-day thing, and you talk about the fact that it was a one-day thing, you've done the same thing for 4 years. If employers want, attendance and punctuality, they also want people who will do the job. And certainly anybody who is willing to do more than what's required is fantastic. So when you have a section all about volunteering, it says, listen, I am somebody who will do more. And sometimes I get asked the question, I'll get a lot of students who will say, well, Carol, I'm kind of embarrassed to put that I did this walk for Susan G. Komen because it's about cancer. And, maybe my mom had cancer growing up, and I don't really know if I want to talk about that. And it's certainly not related to maybe hotel or hospitality. What I say to that is, don't worry about it, as long as you're okay talking about it in an interview, because the point of a resume is to get you an interview. So if it's something you don't want to talk about, then certainly don't include it. But consider that one thing could be the thing that sets you apart from a bunch of other candidates and even comes up in an interview. I've looked at hundreds of resumes over the years in a lot of different capacities. And out of 10 resumes, I will see 1 or 2 with a section like this. And they always jump out at me because I think, wow, they will do more. Again, as long as you're willing to talk about it, I would say don't worry if it's not related to your field. Okay, because it does show that you're willing to do something. If you can start volunteering in a way that's related to your field, even better. If you're a student, there are probably clubs on campus, which I have here for one of our local community colleges, and they put together events for students to participate in. All they kind of have to do is show up. Okay, so that's really helpful to list that as well. Be very honest about what you did and what you had to offer or what you put together, but start thinking about it. If you are a graphic designer and you're working on, getting that degree, see if you can start offering your services for free, like at a church or some other institution that needs your skills and gives you that recent volunteer experience. For some of you, you have more time volunteering than you do working, and so why not fill this section in with all your experience? The other thing I would say is I had a student one time say to me, Carol, I haven't worked a lot because I've been going to school, I've been, raising my family, but also I'm very active in my church, and it was the LDS church. And once we started talking about it, we realized he had a whole page of things he could talk about just related to his volunteer work for the church. And some of it actually applied to the new job that he wanted to have. Some of it didn't directly apply. But I said, what's going on? Why is this not on your resume? And he said, well, it's my religion. And what if an employer doesn't want to hire me, because of my religion or because it's so important to me? And I said, well, I get that. But if an employer doesn't want to hire you, and this is a huge part of your life, do you want to work for that employer? Is that the right fit for you? During some of the seminars I offer, in person, we talk about personal branding and figuring out, what is my brand? Who am I? What are my strengths? What's important to me? And ideally, you would find an employer who values you in your wholeness, in your totality, not just parts of you. And they see the value in all the things that you offer as a volunteer. So I would consider that. Yes, you could leave those things out, but if they're core to who you are, consider not including them. Okay. So at the very bottom here, you'll see I've got a section here that talks about military service. And I have it here at the bottom, not because I don't think it's as valued. In fact, I think if you are someone who served, you should be highly celebrated and valued. And in fact, your military service may go to the top. I have it here at the bottom or toward the bottom of this section, just so that I could talk about it, to make sure you guys know that that's a huge element to probably your experience that should not be left out of a resume. And again, depending on the job you're applying for, depending on your education, if it's needed, depending on your professional experience and what it is and how closely related, your military experience section could go towards the top. I want to be sure that if you did serve, again, your skills do translate. Even if they don't seem like they did, they do. You might just need to spend a little bit of time thinking about the words that were used in the military versus words that are the same but non-military, right? So maybe you had something, I used to teach out at Luke Air Force Base for a community college. And as we were talking through things in the communication world, they would say, oh, I used to do that on a 16-12-52B or something. And of course, I don't know what that is. So I'd have to say, well, tell me what that means in civilian language. And then they would tell me, and then I would say, okay, so if we want to apply this to civilian life, here's what this looks like. But we have to do a little bit of translating for maybe the average employer to understand how your military service adds value. It definitely adds value. Military folks are known for being very punctual, with great attendance, very respectful, hardworking, take initiative, critical thinkers, problem solvers, all the things employers want in candidates. So if you are someone with military experience, I would urge you to have a section that talks about everything that you can add to an employer through your experience. We also have a skills section here at the very bottom. And again, this is not meant to suggest that it needs to be at the bottom. You'll decide that based on everything else that you have listed on your resume. The skills that I've listed here talk about work ethic, digital technology, meaning how you work with technology, teamwork, collaboration, diversity awareness, of course, oral and written communication skills, and critical thinking and problem solving. The reason I have those is really just to remind me to tell you, as I do research, and this hasn't changed over the years, employers say, hey, these 8 skills, or I'm sorry, 6, 7, 8, depending on how you categorize them, these skills are the skills we want in college graduates, and we don't think we're finding to the level that we would want. If you were to read the research, you would see college graduates on a scale of 1 to 10 rate themselves at like an 8 or a 9 in terms of high level of competency. I'm a great communicator. I'm great at critical thinking. These employers rate the college graduates on the same skills, and they rate them at like a 4 or a 5, meaning not only are they, maybe not having all these skills, but there's a disconnect between what the graduates think they have and what the employers think they have. So these skills that I just listed for you are very important to start developing. There will be other skills based on the jobs you want that that you would have in a particular skills section. The way you know what those skills should be is by looking at a job description. Looking at several job descriptions, really, for the jobs that you think you might want. They will tell you what skills they want. And if you have them, then you can have a skills section and list those skills. It's better to list very specific skills that apply to a certain employer than to just throw out general things like teamwork, especially if it hasn't been talked about anywhere in your resume. Because then it looks like you're just putting in fluff and you're not really able to demonstrate that particular skill. Just as a quick review, top to bottom, we talked about the header section, why your address is not here, why your email address should look like it does, your objective, your education section, professional experience as opposed to work history, civic engagement, military, and skills. These are all sections that most of you will have in a resume. My recommendation is put everything you've been doing with your time on your resume to then really understand what you should keep, what you should take out, and how to prioritize it. I hope this has been really helpful for you. Again, if you've got any thoughts as to you'd like to see a particular resume for, re-careering or a curriculum vitae, or some students have asked me, should my resume be different for scholarships? And really it wouldn't be. But if you have anything that you'd like me to cover specifically, please add that for me here. I have a couple of ideas for my next videos, but I'm open to ideas. Hope this was helpful for you guys. Thanks and have a great day.